It is an unforgettable moment in the return of the film The King. No, not that. No, not that. Although the Beacons of Gondor are well remembered from both books and films, there is apparently a corresponding system in Mordor, one that is even more direct and supernatural. Nowadays we cover the beacons or Mordors in nerd or rings. The moment we come across this method of signaling, the Book of the Two Towers arrives while Frodo, Sam, and Gollum make their way through the Morgul Vale. It is through their eyes that we see Sauron communicate with the Witch King. At that moment, the rock trembled and shook beneath them. The great rumbling sound, stronger than ever, rolled across the ground and echoed through the mountains. Then, suddenly, with a burning flash, a large red light appeared. Much beyond the eastern mountains, it shot into the sky and burst through the falling clouds in a fiery red. In that valley of shadow and cold, the light of death seemed unbearably violent and fierce. Piercing stone and rich as rejected knives emerged in the black gaze against the rising flame in Gorgoroth. Then a great shout arose. Minas Morgul responded. There was a livid flare. Blue flame forks leaped from the tower and the surrounding hills among the rustling leaves. The earth moaned, and a call came from the city, mixed with harsh voices like the cries of predatory birds and the wild horses' screams of anger and fear. A race of voices screamed, trembling, quickly on the road, penetrating the hearing range. The hobbits crouched down and covered their ears. As the terrible call ended and fell back into a long, sickly moan of silence, Frodo slowly raised his head. Over the narrow valley, now almost at eye level, stood the walls of the dark city, and the opening gate, resembling an open mouth with shiny teeth, gaped wide. An army emerged from the gate. If this moment sounds familiar, it was indeed adapted in The Return of the King film as a green beam shooting into the air. Yes, The Lord of the Rings created a heavenly beam before about 30 superhero films did it. While this moment is adapted from the books, it is worth noting that we do not see the rising red flash from Barad-dûr. This means that the green beam is more of a signal for the army of Minas Morgul. As we see in the books, Sauron's fortress of Barad-dûr unleashes a red flash that likely appears as lightning. This is his command to the Witch King to begin his attack on Minas Tirith, which occurs on March 10th, 3019, also known as the Last Day of the Dawn, the day Gandalf and Faramir face the Nazgûl. In response to Sauron's signal, he sends the message received by Minas Morgul. The message received: the war is active. Just like Gondor's beacons, this method provides immediate communication, much faster than sending messengers over about 80 miles between the forts. Although the purpose of these flashes is quite clear, it is perhaps most interesting that this is far from the only instance of flashes used by evil, or even good. First, we look at Sauron himself, particularly his fall, where we read, "And while the captains marched south toward the Mordor land, it seemed to them that, black against the clouded sky, a huge shape of shadow, impenetrable, lightning-like, flashed. The eyes filled with enormous dimensions raised above the world, extending a huge, terrible but helpless hand. Because even as he leaned against them, a great wind took him, and he was swept away, and then silence fell. Indeed, this vast cloud and its lightning were so large that they were visible about 150 miles away at Minas Tirith, while Faramir and Éowyn looked to the east. Then it seemed to them that above the outer mountains, another vast mountain of darkness rose, dominating like a wave that would swallow the world, surrounded by lightning. Then a tremor crossed the earth, and they felt the city walls tremble. A sound like a sigh rose from all the lands around them, and their hearts suddenly beat again. We see that among its many powers, Sauron is capable of using lightning as a means of communication. But could his lieutenant? And is there an indication of where Sauron learned this ability? The answer to both is yes. To find these answers, I searched the text for instances where flashes were fired into the sky or seemed to be produced in another way. Another important note. I left out all references to lightning where the term is used metaphorically. We are only looking for supernatural instances. We see not only that the Witch King uses lightning to signal his master, but also that it seems to be part of the magic he later employs against Minas Tirith. Then the Black Captain rose in his stirrups and shouted loudly in a terrible voice, speaking in some forgotten tongue words of strength and terror to strike fear into both heart and stone. He cried 3 times. The great ram boomed 3 times. Suddenly, Gondor's gates broke after the last blow. As if struck by an explosive spell, they shattered in a flash of scorching light, and the doors fell to the ground in broken fragments. But this power does not only exist in the Third Age, we also find it with the Dark Lord himself in the First Age. In the case of Morgoth, it seems he could use this flash as a weapon, because in the story of Beren and Luthien, after the couple stole a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown, they were saved in their escape by the great eagles. While Thorondor and his companions rescued them, the books tell us, then they flew with Luthien and went to the earth and vanished into the clouds. Suddenly, thunder rolled, flashes leaped, and the mountains shook. Fire and smoke belched forth from Thangorodrim, and flaming bolts were hurled far abroad, falling ruinously upon the lands. And years later, when the time came for the final war of wrath, Morgoth, in his desperation, unleashed his last great creations of terror, seemingly accompanied by a storm of his own. But he loosed upon his foes the last desperate assault he had prepared, and out of the pits of Angband emerged the winged dragons that had not been seen before. And so sudden and ruinous was the onset of that dreadful fleet that the host of the Valar was driven back, for the coming of the dragons was accompanied by great thunder, lightning, and a tempest of fire. In each of these instances, Morgoth, Barad-dûr, and Minas Morgul, we see lightning being used supernaturally. But before anyone draws Sith comparisons, we should note that it was not only evil beings who could wield lightning, even as a weapon, for on October 3rd, 3019, as the 4 hobbits traveled the wild with Strider, they caught an odd sight in the distance. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. It was not dawn, for that was still some hours off. What is the light? I don't know, said Strider. It is too far to distinguish. It is like lightning leaping from the hills. Frodo lay down again, but for a long time he could still see the white flashes and against them, the long, dark figure of Strider, silent and vigilant. Eventually he fell into an uneasy sleep. This lightning that leaped from the hills was nothing more than Gandalf the Grey battling 6 of the Nazgûl on Weathertop. As a result of this battle, Gandalf would have been pursued north by 4 of the Ringwraiths, leading to an attack on Aragorn and the hobbits on Weathertop 3 days later. Not only did Gandalf the White later use a ray of light when he saved Faramir, but in his last moments as Gandalf the Grey, he would once again employ this mysterious power of lightning. Speaking with Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, Gandalf describes how his battle with the Balrog could be remembered and seen from afar. The sun shone fiercely there, but everything was wrapped in cloud. I will be out, and even when I came, he burst into a new flame. There was no one, or perhaps after centuries, the songs would still be sung about the Battle of the Peak. Gandalf suddenly laughed, but what would they say in the song? Those who raised their gaze from afar thought that the mountain had been crowned by the assault. The thunder felt and lightning, they said, struck Celebdil and leapt again in tongues of fire. As for the adjustments, this lightning is depicted as Gandalf calls his sword Glamdring before delivering the killing blow at the peak of the mountain. Whether wielded by a great wizard, a dark lord, or a powerful being, this lightning power displays enormous strength, an extraordinary manifestation of magic used for both good and evil in Middle-earth. As always, I want to thank all my YouTube supporters who make this channel possible.